So we're patient-centric paradigms, empowering healthcare solutions. So we call this DCTs, decentralized clinical trials, DCTs unfolded, pharma's paradigm shift. I usually talk a little bit about the why, why we're doing what we're doing. We just wanted to create an objective, unbiased place to where pharma leaders and those using these MTech, emerging technologies, could share their real-life experiences and real-world application. And that's the whole reason we decided to create this series. We found this, wonderfully renovated building. I think it was built, you see, 1895. On the outside, this used to be a factory in here. So bless those souls that labored away in this, 120-degree heat in here. Okay, so with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speech today by Mr. Tomasz Adamusiak, MD, PhD, hope I get that right. Thomas leads a multidisciplinary team advancing clinical and genomic data science. Thomas is a former head of data science at Pfizer Innovation Research, Fire Lab. Has expertise in digital endpoints, decentralized clinical trials, AI, ML, and clinical data. Has held leadership roles in AMIA, Snowman International, and Epic Research Data Network. Dr. Thomas.
Thank you.
Adamusiak.
Thanks for having me. Can you move to us for a second, see myself here? Thank you so my talk will be focused on transformation of healthcare with the recent developments in AI and ML. I work for MITRE. MITRE is a non-profit, very much focused on being a partner to a number of organizations in a way that is does not cause a conflict of interest. Hence, they forced me to put that disclaimer on the slide that none of these opinions are MITRE's. It's just my own, but of course MITRE owns the copyright. MITRE is, as I mentioned, a non-profit. It was founded in 1958 in Bedford, Massachusetts here. Initially as an offshoot of MIT Lincoln Lab, focused on defense. And now, many years later, it's operating what's called a federally funded R&D center, and essentially as supporting advisory type of vehicle for the U.S. government. We have this unique vantage point across many different agencies, and we provide essentially connection capabilities and advisory long-term enduring to the U.S. government. My favorite anecdote about MITRE is that it is actually mentioned in Hunt for Red October. Jack Ryan is working for MITRE in that book. So, not the kind of line of work I'm in, but okay, let me start by this pretty much famous quote that most of you probably heard, said by Jeffrey Hinton almost 10 years ago, when he said that, we should just stop training radiologists right now, AI will take over. Of course, we're 10 years later, nowhere close. We still need a lot of radiologists. In fact, there's some projections showing that we're in a massive shortage of physicians and clinical staff in this country. Now, this number here that you see, it's actually not radiologists. When you look at the report that I'm citing here, most of the gap in clinical staff is actually in primary care. And if you ever tried to sign up to a PCP, primary care provider in the Boston area, you realize that it's a lost cause. There's a huge shortage. There are many different reasons. We don't really have time to go into. But definitely, AI has not stopped us from training physicians. This slide, I know it's a little busy, but what I wanted to show here is on the left side, we're seeing the number of AI, ML enabled devices approved by FDA over the last 20, 30 years, from 95 to 2020. And the key point in this slide is that you see this spike around 2016, an acceleration of, again, AI/ML-enabled devices that the FDA has been approving. So almost a decade in the making. It's not, it hasn't happened last year when, was it last year when ChatGPT was released? There has been a kind of a growing, kind of almost an exponential change in healthcare. And the right-hand side shows, the breakdown by specialty. And of course, the key takeaway here is that most of the revolution, the applications of AI/ML is primarily in imaging-heavy specialties, especially like radiology, cardiovascular has a number of imaging studies, ECG. Some, other specialties somewhat, training, but as that digitization of medicine progresses, we'll see some of those, we'll see some uptick there. For example, the next one on the horizon is most likely pathology, because they're seeing a lot of digitization as well. None of the FDA-cleared devices, as far as I know, at least until now, had a large language model component, but we'll probably see some in the future as well. And then here's the, if with all this revolution that is happening in medicine, where is in AI, where is my robotic chauffeur, right? Never mind the robotaxis. I want someone, to drive me here and just do it. We should be here by now, right? And the reason why we're not is, one explanation is what's called the Moravec's paradox. And it's basically this idea that skills and capabilities that have developed over thousands of years are harder to automate, harder to replicate computationally than things that have a relatively short evolutionary development. And paradoxically, things like speech and language, which we consider to be unique to humans, are by this explanation more easier to replicate, easier to simulate. Because nature, is a relatively new development. In contrast to sensor motor capabilities, which nature has, hundreds of thousands of years to evolve and fine-tune, these are really hard. So as I was preparing those slides, actually last week, well, first Google released a robot, shirt folding demo, and also they had another robot tying shoelaces. So, okay, there goes my slide. And I think Tesla is also planning to release their Optimus Android robot in a couple of years. But I would wager that we're actually not going to see any of those humanoid Android robots anytime soon, because this is a really complex problem to solve. And actually, if that did happen, if we suddenly had those Android, I think it would be a massive shift for the society, because all of a sudden, all this manual labor would go away. I think it would either, lead to a recession, or it would actually be banned. But, we'll see. Again, do not quote me on that, but I don't think that we'll see those kind of robots this century. So my work at MITRE was primarily, we were supporting the VII Cancer Moonshot Initiative. So a lot of our work was around the clinical decision supporting oncology. So some of my examples are kind of focused on oncology. But there, of course, as I showed you in the slide, it's kind of AI is now cross-cutting many different specialties. And this slide just shows you that AI can be applied at kind of many different stages of the patient journey in a patient with cancer. Okay, so that is an interesting slide. It shows, the point of this slide is that AI/ML capacity in radiology is kind of approaching the capability of a radiologist. So I use plots to generate this figure. So, plain plot. It's not super readable. I apologize. But basically, the point of this is a rock curve. The purple line is the AI capability, so it's pretty decent. And then we have the dots. The lighter blue is radiologist unaided, so kind of on par with the AI. And then the purple, the darker blue, is a radiologist with AI support. And the takeaway here is, AI obviously improves the capacity of a radiologist. It happens kind of across the skill spectrum. So even, younger radiologists, whether less or more experienced radiologists, they gain from using AI in the same way. But also, interestingly, you know, the standalone AI is kind of already there, right? It's kind of at the point where it's on par with a highly trained and skilled radiologist. So, you know, can we stop training them? No, not really, of course. But one interesting example how artificial intelligence could be used in a radiology workflow is what's called a rule-out device. And I think if we're going to see an extensive use of AI/ML in medicine, it will be in this kind of workflow. And actually, there are already, I think, ophthalmology has a standalone autonomous device for prediction of for screening of diabetic retinopathy. So this slide is showing you, DPTs are a digital breast tomosynthesis. It's a more advanced method of breast mammography. It's a screening exam for breast cancer. And in this example, you know, the women are screened for breast cancer. They have to undertake the exam. And instead of all those scans going to the radiologist, now there's a filter. There's kind of a gatekeeper that the AI is serving. And assuming that the AI tool is fine-tuned for kind of high negative predictive value, so that, you know, it's not there to detect cancer, it's there to detect a normal exam with high probability, that AI can now discard or rule out some of those exams as normal, and the radiologist doesn't have to see them. The numbers here, you know, I try to they kind of match real life scenarios, but basically, you know, now this radiologist, instead of reading 1,000 exams, only has to read 300, right? He, you know, manually reviews them, and then a recall is when there's something suspicious on the exam, and the patient is brought back for some follow-up exam. Now, obviously, we want to minimize liability. It's one of those hot topics in AI in healthcare, like who's liable, who's going to be sued, who's going to pay out. But putting that aside, you know, this may be the future when you're screening, especially in screening, might be worthwhile. It's not actually seen by human, but by AI/ML device first. Now, if you're a radiologist, that is obviously not that great. Because suddenly, from seeing those 5,000 reads where, you know, maybe 300 are potentially suspicious, almost all of your reads are suspicious. So the workload, you know, you're still seeing 1,000 reads, because you're still seeing 1,000 images, 1,000 stats, because you're being paid by scan. But now the cases that you're seeing are much more complex, right? So we'll have to see some changes in the paradigms, how healthcare professionals are paid, and it can also impact their training, right? Because in a regular practice, you will not necessarily be seeing those normal images. So there's some interesting times ahead. And also the other aspect that, you know, why do we still need radiologists? There's a recent paper that came out in Nature showing that a number of those medical devices, AI-enabled medical devices that I showed you earlier, there's not a lot of data to back that they have been tested, you know, properly. And the reason for that is that what you're seeing here at the bottom is what's called a predicate network. A typical workflow for approving a medical device is what's called a 510K pathway, and it assumes equivalency. If you can show that your new device is equivalent to a large extent to your previous device that you have previously or had been already approved, then you don't have to go through this kind of rigorous testing, what's called the novel pathway. But, you know, as those equivalence networks are built, it has been shown that sometimes we actually are missing the evidence for the underlying algorithm. So, you know, the upside for the manufacturer is, of course, that it's easier to have a device approved, but so there's less regulation. But from a patient standpoint, there's not always, you know, clear that the device has been appropriately tested. You know, despite showing results that it's working. And that's another very interesting study where a lot of the AI ML algorithms are kind of black boxes. And there's this idea or an assumption that as long as you make the algorithm explainable, the physician or clinician can catch the error and correct the AI if they make an error. So the authors here did a study. They had two different algorithms. One was slightly biased. Their accuracy was very similar, 70 to 75%, probably both would get approval. The explanation is that the algorithm was detecting heart failure and I think pneumonia. And the explanation was, the physician would see an X-ray, and as part of the explanation, the algorithm would highlight areas in the X-ray that the algorithm used for the prediction. And for the bias algorithm, the highlighted area would, completely random. And the idea was, can the physician, if the scoring is incorrect, can they correct the AI if they see the explanation? And it turned out that they cannot. Part of the reason is what's called the automation bias. We tend to just agree with the predictions. That's actually the huge part of it. There's just, the automation bias kicks in, and the people just don't get corrected. So AI explainability is not necessarily going to solve our issues with potentially biased AI algorithms. And there are others. There's, for example, another famous case where an AI algorithm trained across multi-center pathology slides learns to pick up the type of staining or slight differences in staining that the institutions were using for their slides and use this as a proxy kind of for predicting the outcomes. Completely bogus. It didn't work. It works in a particular setting unless you try to generalize or move the algorithm. So there's some other challenges. This is the reason why we still need a human in the loop, and we need a lot more research, and we're not quite there yet for being able to replace clinicians or clinical staff. There's this famous paper from the MIT that showed that close to 90% of algorithms deteriorate with time. Just deteriorate. Not even data shift. They just stop working eventually. Maybe this is why ChatGPT is getting worse and worse. But these are sometimes chaotic systems, and they just stop working. And we have to be aware. We have to continuously continue to test and evaluate the algorithms. Now, of course, there are many different challenges like local differences in clinical practice and so on. So it's not, you can have a very well behaving device in an artificial research setting. It's really hard to progress to real practice. This is an interesting study, GPT-4V. It was like a GPT before GPT-0, and now of course we have GPT-01. They really need to come up with better names. But the key takeaway, obviously all those LLMs do pretty well on text, probably because there's a lot of contamination of the actual text in the training set. But here the researchers tried to see, because they're becoming multimodal, and they were looking at how well, how that vision model would read X-rays. Obviously, one of the challenges is that there's not enough training data, so it did poorly. But also, it wasn't really trained for it, right? But there are patients out there putting their, exams into ChatGPT, and so we should be aware of that. Briefly, the chatbots, there's a number of those as well. How many minutes do I have? 3 minutes? I will be wrapping it up. That is, I think, especially in pharma, I think we've seen one from Novo Nordisk. There's some other examples here. They're unfortunately failing. Mostly because, LLMs hallucinate, you need guardrails. The one example on the left from was a society aiming for eating disorders, and the chatbot was recommending, for the users to drop weight, which is obviously a big no. I think if we're going to see AI, one big application for large language models, I think it is in messaging, or generally in communication. Anecdotally, I used ChatGPT to message my physician, and I think we're going to see more of that, especially with kind of agentic workflows, just GPTs talking to one another. My dream is one day to just sending, as part of my emailing, corporate emails, just sending prompts. No more actual communication. Well, no, we'll meet in person, but I think a lot of communication could be really automated. And I think we're also seeing a lot of ambient AI is also a big topic. Now when you're in a physician's office, a lot of the physician is distracted. They have to take notes, document the encounter. This will likely go away. The AI will be just listening in the background and documenting, both from video and from audio. So I think there's some already existing systems out there in this space. I will end maybe at this slide, just so in the interest of time. There's already a lot of regulatory regulation around it. Still 3 minutes? Okay, then maybe okay, 2 minutes. Let's wrap it up. This came out of the Office of Science and Technology of the White House. It's not an actual law, but it's being used by a number of states as a blueprint. So great naming there. I think the one thing I wanted to call out is this idea that as a patient you should be informed that AI is being used in your treatment, and also potentially the ability to opt out from an AI-enabled workflow. I think both are really challenging because AI is being embedded so deeply into the workflows that you won't even know where it is. And the second one, it will also be challenging because as it becomes standard of care, you will not be able to opt out, right? Because what would be the option, like not a treatment. There are also a number of other regulatory laws actually that already exist. I would call it the Section 1557 because it's the latest one, and actually it says that the health IT approved technology has to be free from algorithmic bias. So the bias is a really a huge focus of a number of those regulations, and it's the rest side. So if I would say, I'll let you read it, but one thing that I would like to call out is the equitable access to healthcare. We are already seeing that more affluent areas, hospitals with better margins, are better capable and positioned to deploy AI-enabled technology. And I think this will only exacerbate some of those disparities in healthcare. So I think we have to make an active effort that this technology is available and can profit everyone. And with that, thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Wonderful. Some key takeaways. It's amazing, covering the ethical, regulatory, technological, and so many things kind of going through my head. Moral hazards and things like this that I don't often think about. Over reliance on AI, under reliance on AI. So it was quite amazing talk. Thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute break. The bathrooms, as I mentioned before, are just right out the door and immediately right. So they're multi-gender restrooms.